A general election means one thing. It's your chance to decide who you want as your Member of Parliament.
Hi there, I thought I'd record a quick video on election day to catalogue my sense of what the campaign's been like, what the results are likely to be, and what this means for the next Labour government. So first of all, the campaign. Well, it's been a catastrophic Conservative campaign. It's been one of the most woeful campaigns I can imagine. The Conservative Party never really gave a sense that they had a political strategy, and in the end they defaulted to the strategy that they were always going to end up with, which was to attack Labour, specifically on tax, arguing that a Labour government, if they got in, would increase everybody's tax bill.
The alternative is Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, who are packed with people who want Britain to give up its nuclear deterrent and raise taxes. After 4 years of not saying what he'd do, Keir Starmer is still the man who campaigned to make Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister twice. Now Keir Starmer won't back our increase in defence spending. It's the same old Labour Party. They're not only a risk to our nation's security, they're also a threat to the money in your pocket. They'll bankrupt Britain with their £38.5 billion black hole, costing working families £2,094 more in taxes. They'll slap a retirement tax on pensioners, and they'll bring in French-style union laws which would hammer business. So the choice on the 4th of July is clear. Stick with the plan by choosing bold action for a more secure future, or go back to square one with Keir Starmer and the same old Labour.
The flip side of that is that the Labour Party in this campaign have been incredibly cautious. I would argue that they've been too cautious. They've ruled out tax rises, so they've ruled out increasing income tax, they've ruled out increasing national insurance, they've ruled out increasing VAT, and they've imposed upon themselves for the next Parliament a set of fiscal rules that means that whilst they can borrow to invest, and that will be very welcome, particularly in the public sector, they have committed to have debt falling as a percentage of GDP by the end of the Parliament, and they're also going to continue, it looks like, they're going to continue with Tory spending plans which imply cuts to unprotected departments, which means austerity under a Labour government, none of which I'm particularly happy about, I've got to say. But the Labour strategy really was an anxious strategy and a cautious strategy. They were thinking very much about 1992, and the narrative of that election, how much truth there is in this, I don't know. I was only 7 in the 1992 election, but the narrative that Labour tell themselves is that Neil Kinnock lost that election because, I think it was John Smith at the time, Shadow Chancellor, he did a shadow budget where he revealed Labour's spending plans, and the Conservative Party were able to say that there would be a tax bombshell under Labour, and they were able to evidence that.
January 1992. Labour is so keen to get into power that they've been making lots of promises. Adding up the cost of all the promises Labour have made to date, it comes to an astonishing £35 billion extra a year. Where would they get this money? They have already announced 8 new taxes, which would amount to the biggest increase in taxation since the war. But it's still not enough. Where would Labour get the rest of the money to pay for their £35 billion worth of promises? From the rich? There aren't enough around to pay for it all, even if you tax them at 98%, as Labour did before. So Labour would have to come up with something else. Something that would hit everyone. To pay for Labour's promises, the average taxpayer would end up being hit by an extra £1,000 tax bill.
So right throughout this campaign, we've had this narrative, haven't we, that the Labour Party are going to end up putting up taxes. And that was always going to be the Tory strategy in the election. They were always going to have to rely upon frightening people about a Labour victory. And so I guess that the strategy for Labour in this election was to just try and reassure. And that's clearly worked. But the problem with that is, if you have a message that just says change at the election, and you don't really give people a positive reason to vote for your party, that's going to produce perhaps not as strong a result as you might have won, but it's also going to risk putting together an electoral coalition that is wide but shallow. And what Labour really need to do is build an electoral coalition that's going to be solid. People are going to feel really sure about why they've voted Labour, that will sustain them in office for a period of time. And my sense is that really Labour are going to come to power off the back of an anti-Tory vote as a product of two big events in the run-up to the election, well, over the past 5 years, really. First of all, Boris Johnson and Partygate, and particularly the lies and the obfuscations that came after Partygate, and then, of course, Liz Truss's disastrous 50 days in office, where the financial markets went haywire because of that mini-budget delivered by Kwasi Kwarteng, and, of course, the effect that that had on people's mortgages, and then, of course, other things around that, such as the cost of living crisis and the flatlining real wages that have been stagnant for over a decade, the biggest fall in living standards since the Napoleonic Wars. So Labour were always going to win this election. I guess what I'm trying to say is this. Labour should have been bolder, and they didn't do enough to give people a reason to vote for them. So I'm a natural Labour voter. I haven't voted Labour at this election. And my vote would have been very easy to win, actually. I would be very happy to vote for a Labour Party that was going to do just a little bit more than Keir Starmer has committed to. Because for me, a Labour Party that goes into an election, for example, promising austerity in some departments when we've got a real problem with spending in the public sector, and a Labour Party that will not even get rid of the 2-child benefit cap, that's a Labour Party I can't support, personally. So the Labour Party will win a huge majority. Maybe by the time you're watching this, they already have. So the key question then is, what do they do? They've just won this big majority. They've got a huge mandate for change, but they've also constrained themselves for two reasons, really. First of all, they've constrained themselves fiscally by committing to a set of fiscal rules that are very constraining. And second of all, they've constrained themselves by having a very modest and moderate manifesto. So I think what Labour will do in power is they're going to try and get some of the big things done that they can get done that won't cost any money. So an example of that would be their agenda on workers' rights. And another big example of that is deregulating the planning system so that they're going to be able to get houses built. They're committed to 1.5 million homes being built over the next 5 years. And they think that this deregulation will also be part of the way that they're going to generate the economic growth that's going to allow them to be bolder in the future. So that's where their agenda lies. But I think they're going to face pretty immediate problems. It's really clear that the public sector needs a very immediate injection of cash. This isn't like 1997, where Labour could afford to stick to Tory spending plans over the course of the first Parliament. They're going to have to inject cash in pretty quickly, if only to deal with the fact that public sector unions, the BMA are already on strike, teachers may well go on strike in the future, the public sector unions are just not going to put up with having a Labour government that's going to be giving them wage rises at less than the level of inflation, when, as we all know, real wages in the public sector have been in decline over the last 10 to 15 years, and all of our wages have been flat. So Labour's going to have to spend, and in order to do that, they're going to have to do what Gordon Brown did, particularly between 1997 and 2001, but really throughout his time in power. There are going to be stealth taxes, and my suggestion would be that the Labour Party should go after things like capital gains tax, try and tax things whereby it's not going to be ordinary people that suffer from tax rises, it's going to be taking money away from the wealthy. And there's lots of good reasons to do that. The wealthy are not going to miss the money as much. But massive concentrations of wealth within an unequal society are also bad for the economy more generally, because if you've got massive concentrations of wealth, it tends to suck the economic resources of society towards the wealthy, which means that the public realm, or the money that's spent on doing the sorts of things we need for the rest of us, tends to suffer. Bit of a left-wing point there. So that's, I think, what I've got to say as we run up to the election. I'm really excited to see what the result is this evening. Please join me again for a future video. If you like these videos, like and subscribe to the channel. Goodbye for now.